It's that time again. It's the podcast that takes your personal and professional life to a whole new level. Whether you're selling a product, selling a service, or selling yourself, one thing is for sure. You're always selling for life.
All right, and welcome to another installment of this Selling for Life podcast, sponsored by Conoco Parts, a world of parts with a personal touch. This podcast is about more than just selling stuff. We think if you stick around, you'll get a lot out of it, and this is episode 41. I'm Steve, and I am flying solo today. Got a little subject here that I think will hit home with a lot of people. Okay, and before I do that, I'd like to just kind of give you a little bit of update on my life in the last week. Not that you necessarily care, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because it's going to lead into what I'm going to be talking about today. I do another podcast, and it's called the Idiots Podcast. You can find it on iTunes and Google Play, but I'm putting it on hiatus, and I'm putting it on hiatus because I find that my life has just been cram-packed with stuff, and I am really not the best at time management, and I realize that there are a number of other projects that are kind of going to have to take priority. So sadly, the Idiots Podcast is going to be suspended for a little while. And some of you out there know me and probably listen to the Idiots Podcast. It's been a lot of fun. We did almost 40 episodes, and I might pick it up again someday pretty soon. But for now, I am, dare I say it, quitting. Not going to do it anymore. And so that brings us to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day is quitting. How many of us out there have been faced with that dilemma of whether or not to quit something? Because you've heard the expression, winners never quit and quitters never win. Or it could be the other way around, I'm not sure, but either way works. But is that necessarily true? If we quit, are we losing? If we quit, are we failing? How many of us should perhaps give up on something? How much time and money and effort and energy sometimes is spent on things that really just doesn't make a difference in our lives? So back to that other podcast, I started it because it was a lot of fun. We just wanted to kick around and record ourselves, and it really started to take off. And we started some social media websites and everything. But I found that spending even 4 hours, 5 hours, one day a week doing that was really kind of cutting into the other things that I had going on, specifically family time. I would come home from work and go downstairs to work on the podcast. The editing process took a couple hours, and my kids were upstairs, and they were kind of wondering when Daddy's going to come back upstairs from his office to play a little bit. And I got other things going on, and the podcast started out to be fun, and then after a while, I found myself almost not dreading the podcast, but just not having as much fun. And so I had to do some evaluating, and then I decided, with all the other things going on, other projects that I have, that the podcast, at least for now, needs to be suspended. And that's another, I guess, word to say that I was quitting. And there are many things in our lives that are similar. It could be your job, it could be your relationship, it could be any other sort of type of a commitment that you have with somebody, a friend, a family member, where you are, watching their kids. So it is hard to, once you start doing something for a certain reason, to decide that I can't do it anymore. I have to quit. And there's a stigma that comes with quitting. Basically, people who say that expression, quitters never win and winners never quit, you feel like the word quit just indicates failure. Now, there are certain sure signs that quitting is better for you in the long run. And while many of it's just common sense, it's really hard to look at a situation objectively. It can be frightening, and there are always some positives to hold you back. And quitting often feels, again, like failure, especially if you've invested a lot of effort and time into an endeavor. You're all in on something, and then suddenly you have to say, I'm going to stop doing this. Now, here's some sure tell signs of why you might want to quit something. You're consistently experiencing more frustration than reward. Now, with my podcast example, there was reward. It was fun. I got to spend some time with some people that I like, and we were just doing it for fun. But we are also tracking our numbers and seeing how many people were downloading the podcast, and the numbers weren't really that impressive at all. And eventually, those numbers were kind of taking over the fun of it and trying to move the podcast in a direction where we wanted to see more progress. And so really, I was experiencing a little more frustration than reward. And so I decided, at least for the podcast, that I needed to stop. With any situation, you have to take the bad with the good. But if your experience is overwhelmingly negative for a long period of time, you have to consider leaving or making some sort of radical change. Another reason why you might want to consider calling it quits is you can't envision a possible solution for continuing doing what you're doing. When it comes to a job, for instance, when you've been in a job for a while and you've been expecting to have some sort of progress or promotions or whatnot, and you just see that your job's not going to be leading you in a direction that you want to, it's now time to start evaluating and decide whether or not there's a solution in your career that's going to make it worthwhile sticking with a job, okay? Maybe you've been promised a promotion, right? For years. Maybe maybe you're waiting on others to change their habits when it's the last thing they want to do, or when you're talking about relationships. For some situations, like when you're stuck with a bad manager, you might not have any choice but to quit. Sometimes your hand is forced. That's actually probably the easiest way to quit, is when you know that there's no other choice. But if you ignore the fear of quitting and consider, do you think you could achieve a better life for yourself when you quit? That is a way to look at it to help you make a big decision on moving in another direction. Okay, another reason to quit is if you're staying in a commitment for a wrong reason. There are so many times we'll be doing something in life that is based on the fact that we don't want to let other people down. We don't like the image of, giving up on something. We are staying in it because we feel obligated to somebody. That's a big reason, is the obligation that we feel. If your decision is to stay based on more on fear than on faith, you're probably you're staying for the wrong reasons. Again, don't worry about hurting people's feelings. Staying with something solely out of the sense of responsibility. Because, or being afraid to admit you made a wrong decision. That's another reason why is pride. We start doing something and we don't want to quit because it looks like we're telling to the world that we screwed up. Well, that's okay. It doesn't matter what they think. Why stay with something for a long period of time, wasting time, money, energy, when you can move in a new direction and start something else? So don't think of quitting as either good or bad in itself or reflection of your self-worth. Many of us have a hard time quitting. For others, changes everything, and quitting comes probably too easily. When it comes to quitting, you have to kind of really make sure you should quit, okay? And then another good indicator that maybe you should give up on something is if your friends and family keep telling you to quit. Now, one person might tell you something along the lines of you should give up on this. But if you hear it from a number of people, they can see things from a view that you probably can't. And if you're hearing a lot of people say you need to let this go, let this person go, quit this job, then you should probably evaluate a little bit more what you're hearing and then make a decision based on that. Now, make sure you've identified the real causes of your unhappiness. A lot of times people will just quit something because they think that's the problem, that's what's making them unhappy, that's where their frustration is coming from. But really, it may not be the job or the relationship or the commitment. It might be something on the outside that you haven't really considered. Sometimes it's other areas of our lives that are making us miserable and affecting everything else. Maybe you've just had a series of bad days due to other causes, like you're not sleeping well, or perhaps you're just missing the right tools or skills to finish a job. So identify the real issues before you proceed on making a decision to quit. Now, one thing that we should all do is, before we just throw up our hands and quit on something, is just give it a chance, right? Or try to make changes in your situation and in your environment to give yourself a better chance of succeeding at what you were hoping to succeed at. Many things like diets require time to work out. If you just start a job, don't let the newness of it scare you off, okay? If you're finding things early on really tough to learn, a new program to learn, a new system, if you're trying to meet people or you're in a group setting or you're going to a new church or anything like that, give it time, give it a chance before you just say, I'm out of here. And finally, have a backup plan. When you know you're going to quit something, okay, make sure you know where you're going, okay? You don't just quit a job, walk out, and then say, I'm a free man or woman. All right, now what? You should probably have something lined up for yourself before you lose that paycheck. When it comes to relationships, you don't necessarily have to have anything lined up, okay? You just quit on a relationship. In fact, if you're quitting a relationship, you probably shouldn't be going right into another one, kind of figure out like what happened in the previous one before you get into another one. You should have a checklist of stuff you should do before you take the leap of quitting whatever it is that you've got going on. All right, well, that's it for the 41st Selling for Life podcast. You can check out our website at sellingforlife.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So remember, whether you're selling elastic suitcase straps or you're just trying to convince yourself you gotta quit wasting your time on a silly podcast so you can spend more time with your kids, one thing is for sure, you're always selling for life. Get better, Al. Hope you feel better.